The moment I saw my daughter-in-law across the restaurant, I realized two things at once. First, she wasn't supposed to be there. Second, she definitely wasn't supposed to be there with him. And that's how a simple Tuesday lunch turned into the quiet beginning of the strangest revenge story of my life. I'm 61 years old. My name is Daniel Harper, and until that afternoon, I believed my biggest problems were property taxes and a leaking roof. I live in a modest ranch house about 15 minutes outside Wichita, Kansas. Same house my wife and I bought in 1989 for $86,000. These days Zillow claims it's worth $340,000, which still feels ridiculous to me. The roof leaks, the fence leans like it's drunk, and the air conditioner makes a noise like a dying lawnmower every July. But it's home. My wife passed away 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. I still sometimes reach for her side of the bed in the morning before remembering. After she died, the house became very quiet. Too quiet. So most days I keep busy doing small jobs. Fixing things. Driving places slowly. Drinking coffee where the waitress calls me Han. Which is why I was at Riverside Grill that Tuesday at exactly 12:17 p.m. I was meeting a contractor. A guy named Bill Matthews who claimed he could repair my roof for $7,800 instead of the $14,000 the first company quoted. Suspiciously cheap, but worth a conversation. I arrived early and grabbed a booth near the window. Ordered black coffee. The waitress poured it without asking. I was staring at a legal pad where I'd written questions like an old man preparing for battle. Roof warranty? Timeline? Down payment? Very serious stuff. Life-changing stuff. Or so I thought. Then the restaurant door opened. And everything changed. I noticed her immediately. Not because I expected to see her, but because no father-in-law expects to see his son's wife sitting in a restaurant holding hands with a man who is not his son. Emily Harper. My daughter-in-law. 32 years old. Blonde. Always perfectly put together. The kind of woman who says things like, "We only eat organic now." She walked in laughing. Laughing in that soft way people do when they're trying not to be obvious. The man with her was tall. Maybe early 40s. Expensive watch. Navy blazer. The kind of guy who probably owns several pairs of shoes that cost more than my truck. They didn't see me, which made the whole thing worse, because I had time to watch. They sat at a corner table, close together, too close. His hand rested on her back. Her fingers touched his wrist. And then she said something that made him laugh and lean forward. The kind of lean that doesn't and oppose. Belong between coworkers, or friends, or anything innocent. I felt my stomach tighten. You know that weird moment when your brain tries to protect you? When it whispers, maybe this is nothing. Maybe you and oppose. Misunderstanding. Maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. So I kept watching, just to be sure. Their food arrived. They shared fries. He wiped ketchup from her lip with his thumb. And she didn't move away. Instead, she leaned into him. Slowly, comfortably, like someone who had done that before. Many times. I stared down into my coffee and took a sip. Cold. I hadn't noticed it getting cold. Across the room, Emily suddenly froze. Her eyes lifted, locked onto mine, and the color drained from her face. For 3 full seconds, we just looked at each other. Then she stood up so quickly her chair scraped the floor. The man looked confused. Emily walked straight toward my booth. Fast. Panicked. I remember noticing strange details. The way her heels clicked. The smell of her perfume. The way my hands stayed perfectly steady around the coffee mug. Funny what the brain records during betrayal. She slid into the seat across from me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad? What are you doing here?" I sniffed once. Not because I was crying. Just a habit when I'm uncomfortable. "Meeting a contractor," I said calmly. "Roof repair." Her eyes flicked toward the man at the table. He was watching us now. Suspicious. Confused. Emily leaned closer. "Please don't say anything," she whispered. Just like that. "No explanación. No denial." Just fear. I tilted my head. "Who's the gentleman?" She closed her eyes for a second, then whispered something I'll probably never forget. He's married. Of course he was, because betrayal likes company. I sniffed again. Your husband, my son, would probably be interested in this information. Her hand grabbed mine across the table. Tight, desperate. Please, she said. Just don't tell him. I'm begging you. For a moment neither of us spoke. I studied her face. The fear, the calculation, the selfishness, and suddenly a lot of little memories started lining up inside my head like puzzle pieces. Emily asking about our family savings last Christmas. Emily pushing my son to refinance the house. Emily insisting on expensive vacations. At the time I thought she was ambitious. Now I wondered if she was just greedy. Across the room the man checked his phone, probably wondering why his lunch date had turned into a family reunion. Emily squeezed my hand again. Please keep this between us. I slowly nodded. All right. Her shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you, she whispered. Then she stood and walked back to her table. The man said something to her. She laughed again, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't sitting 15 feet away holding a grenade. I waited until she sat down. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. Not to my son. No, that would have been the obvious move. Instead, I searched the man's name. Took less than a minute. Public records are amazing things when you're 61 and bored with the internet. His name was Gregory Lawson, Regional Sales Director, lives 20 minutes away, married, 2 kids, and his wife's phone number was easier to find than my reading glasses. So I dialed it. The phone rang twice. A woman answered. Hello. I sniffed once. Ma'am, I said politely. My name is Daniel Harper. There was a short pause. Yes? I believe your husband is currently having lunch with my daughter-in-law. Silence. Long silence. Then very calmly she asked, which restaurant? I looked across the room. Emily was laughing again. Gregory leaned closer to her, like the world belonged to them. Riverside Grill, I said. Another pause. Then the woman replied in a voice colder than January in Kansas. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line clicked. I put my phone down, took another sip of cold coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I felt wide awake. The strange thing about revenge is that it rarely starts with anger. It starts with observation. I sat there in that booth at 12:24 p.m., staring at my cold coffee and occasionally glancing toward the corner table. Emily and Gregory looked relaxed again. Too relaxed, like 2 people who believed the danger had passed. I sniffed quietly. People assume revenge comes with shouting and broken plates. In my experience, it mostly comes with patience and a decent internet connection. Gregory leaned closer to Emily. He said something that made her laugh. She touched his arm again. That casual touch bothered me more than anything else. Not the betrayal, not the lie, but the comfort. Comfort only comes after practice, which meant this wasn't new. Across the room, Gregory raised his glass of iced tea. Emily clinked hers against it, like they were celebrating something. I checked my watch. 12:26 p.m. For minutes since I made the phone call. 6 minutes until the storm arrived. I've lived long enough to know that when life shows you a crack in the wall, you should look inside. So while waiting, I did a little more digging. Phone in hand. Reading glasses halfway down my nose. The man's name again, Gregory Lawson. Regional Sales Director for a construction supply company. Salary estimate online, $180,000 a year. Nice house in a subdivision called Maple Ridge Estates. Mortgage from 2019 for $620,000. 2 kids. Private school tuition. And according to public property records, his wife owned 40% of a local bakery business. Interesting. Very interesting. Because people like Gregory usually have 2 things, money and something to lose. At 12:28 p.m., Emily looked toward my table again. I lifted my coffee mug and nodded politely. She forced a smile, the kind of smile people give when they're not sure if the bomb has actually been defused. Gregory noticed the exchange. Friend of yours? He asked her. I couldn't hear the words clearly. That was new. Emily hadn't been to church since 2016, and that was only because my wife dragged the entire family to Christmas service. Still, I admired the creativity. The door of the restaurant opened. Exactly 12:30 p.m., right on schedule. A woman walked in fast. Not storming, not screaming, just walking with the steady pace of someone who already knew the truth. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled tight, no makeup, but her eyes were sharp. She scanned the room once, then twice. Her gaze landed on Gregory, and stopped. For a moment she didn't move. Then she walked toward the counter and said something quietly to the hostess. The hostess looked confused, then nodded, and pointed toward the back. The woman turned. Our eyes met briefly. I gave a small nod. She understood immediately. You'd be surprised how clearly strangers can communicate when betrayal is involved. I sniffed again. Across the room Gregory was still talking, still smiling, still leaning toward Emily like the world was perfectly safe. The woman walked slowly toward their table, each step deliberate. No rush. Emily saw her first. Her smile vanished instantly. Her shoulders stiffened. Gregory noticed the change. He turned around, and when he saw the woman standing behind him, his entire body froze. "Greg," she said calmly. Just that. One word. But it landed like a hammer. Emily's face went pale. Gregory stood up halfway. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" "Ah, so her name was Lisa. Good to know." Lisa looked from Gregory to Emily, then back again. Her voice stayed level. "You left the house this morning saying you had a meeting." Gregory swallowed. "Well, yeah. Lisa turned to Emily. "And you must be the meeting." Emily looked like she might faint. Now, most people expected fireworks at this point, but Lisa surprised everyone. She pulled out the empty chair at their table, sat down, folded her hands, and smiled politely at the waitress who happened to be walking by. "Could I get a coffee?" The waitress nodded nervously and hurried away. The silence at the table was painful. Gregory sat slowly. Emily stared at the table like it might open and swallow her. Lisa looked perfectly calm. Then she said something that made me choke on my coffee. "So," she said, "should we talk about the hotel receipts? Or the credit card charges first?" Gregory's face turned gray. Emily's head snapped up. "Ah, so Lisa had already been investigating." That made me like her immediately. For the next 5 minutes, the restaurant was filled with quiet tension. No shouting, no scenes, just sharp, careful conversation. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough pieces. 3 months. Work conferences. Miami. $4, $200 on the company card. At one point Gregory tried to reach for Lisa's hand. She moved it away without looking at him. Cold, efficient, professional almost. Finally Lisa leaned back in her chair. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire direction of the story. "I already spoke to a lawyer this morning." Gregory blinked. "What?" Lisa nodded calmly. "Yes." She took a sip of the coffee that had just arrived. "Divorce paperwork is ready." Emily inhaled sharply. Gregory looked like someone had unplugged him. Lisa continued, "And the company board will be receiving copies of those credit card statements." Gregory's eyes widened. Now that was a real problem. Because according to the company website I had just read, Gregory's position required strict financial compliance and ethical conduct. In other words, affairs were messy, but fraud ended careers. Gregory stood up suddenly. "Lisa, wait." She raised a finger. He stopped. "You had months to explain," she said calmly. "Now I have 10 minutes before my attorney calls." She looked at Emily for the first time since sitting down. A long look, measured. Then she said quietly, "You should choose better men." Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking. From my booth, I watched the whole scene unfold. Quietly, patiently, like a man watching a chess match reach its final moves. Funny thing is, I hadn't even started my own plan yet. This was just the opening act. Because while Gregory's marriage was collapsing at that table, Another problem still needed solving. My son, Emily's husband, and the uncomfortable truth that betrayal rarely stops at just one victim. I finished my cold coffee, checked the time, 12:41 p.m. Then I stood up slowly, because the next step of this story was going to require a lawyer, and possibly a detective. I sniffed once. Life had just become very interesting. I didn't leave the restaurant immediately. Revenge, like good barbecue, benefits from low heat and patience. So instead, I walked slowly to the cashier and paid my $3.75 coffee bill. I even left a $5 tip, which confused the waitress because technically I had only ordered one refill. Then I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my truck. My 2008 Ford F-150 still smells faintly like motor oil and peppermint gum. My wife used to complain about both. I sat there with the engine off, just thinking. Across the window I could still see through the restaurant glass. Lisa was standing now. Gregory looked like a man who had just discovered gravity. Emily was staring at the table. I sniffed once. Then I pulled out my phone again. Because the truth is, the moment Emily grabbed my hand and begged me to stay quiet, something inside my brain clicked. It wasn't an oppose. Anger. Not exactly. It was clarity. And clarity makes planning easier. The first call I made after leaving the restaurant wasn't to my son. It was to Robert Keller. Robert and I go back 30 years. He used to drink cheap beer with me in my garage while our kids rode bikes in the driveway. These days Robert is a divorce attorney in Wichita. Very successful, very expensive, and very blunt. He answered on the third ring. "Daniel," he said, "you still owe me $50 from a poker game in 1998. I smiled. "Add interest. I'll pay you 70. "What's going on?" I took a breath. "Hypothetically," I said, "if someone discovered their daughter-in-law having an affair, and that daughter-in-law might also be pushing their son into some questionable financial decisions." Robert didn't hesitate. "Then hypothetically," he said, "I'd tell that father to start collecting evidence before saying a single word. Define evidence. Bank statements, property records, phone logs, anything showing financial manipulation." I looked through the windshield again. Emily had finally left the restaurant. Alone. Her walk was fast now. Panicked. Gregory and Lisa were still inside. "Robert," I said quietly. "What?" "I think this situation might be bigger than an affair." There was a short pause. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Daniel, when money and cheating appear together, assume they're partners." That conversation lasted 22 minutes. By the time we finished, I had a plan. Not a loud plan. Not a dramatic plan. Just a careful one. Robert agreed to review any documents I could gather. And he recommended someone else. "Private investigator. Name's Carlin Gwynn," he said. "Former police detective. Expensive, but very good." "How expensive?" $200 an hour. I sniffed. "Well," I said, "cheaper than divorce." The first clue appeared faster than I expected. 2 nights later, my son Mark came over for dinner. Mark is 35, good kid, works as a civil engineer, makes around $92,000 a year and somehow still manages to stress about money. He sat at the kitchen table eating leftover chili. Emily wasn't with him. "She's visiting a friend," he said. Of course she was. I nodded. "Work going okay?" He shrugged. "Busy. Also, we're thinking about refinancing the house." There it was. I kept my voice calm. "Oh, yeah," he said. "Emily found a lender offering better terms." "What kind of terms?" "Pulling about $80,000 equity." I set down my spoon. "Why?" He hesitated. "Investment opportunity." That phrase. That exact phrase. I had heard it before. Usually right before someone lost a lot of money. "What investment?" "Greg, a friend of Emily's, is involved in a development project." I stared at him. "Greg?" "Yeah, Gregory Lawson." I sniffed slowly. The room suddenly felt very quiet. After Mark left, I made another phone call. Carlin Gwynn answered on the first ring. Her voice was direct. What do you need? I explained everything. I was sitting in my living room pretending to watch a baseball game. Her voice sounded almost impressed. Well, she said, you were right to be suspicious. What did you find? Gregory Lawson is currently under internal investigation at his company. For what? Misuse of corporate funds. I leaned forward. How much? Approximately $96,000 over the last year. I whistled softly. Carla continued. And guess where some of that money went? I didn't answer, because I already knew. Private real estate deals, she said. Fake development opportunities. I felt a cold chill move through my chest. And Emily? Carla paused. She's been attending meetings with him. How many? 6 that I could confirm. Hotel meetings? Yes. I sniffed again. Then Carla delivered the final piece. Daniel, your son's refinance money was likely going to fund Gregory's next project. Which means your son was about to invest $80,000 into something that doesn't exist. For a long moment I didn't speak. Then I said quietly, Carla, can you prove it? She chuckled. Oh yes. And suddenly the entire game changed. 2 days later I invited Mark and Emily over for dinner. Sunday night, 6 p.m. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, family dinner. Emily arrived wearing a bright smile, the same one she used at the restaurant. Hi, Dad, she said sweetly. I sniffed. Hello, Emily. Mark sat at the table. Emily was just telling me Gregory wants to meet this week about the investment. Emily nodded eagerly. It's a great opportunity. I placed a folder on the table. Thick, heavy. Before that, I said calmly, I think we should review something. Mark looked confused. Emily looked terrified. I opened the folder. Inside were bank reports, corporate investigation notes, hotel receipts, photos from Carla, including one very clear picture of Emily and Gregory entering a hotel together. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Mark stared at the page. What is this? I folded my hands and said the quietest sentence of the night. Your investment opportunity. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. The strange thing about truth is that when it finally lands, it doesn't explode. It sinks, slowly, like a stone in water. Mark sat at the kitchen table staring at the photographs. His hand rested on the page where Emily and Gregory were walking into the hotel lobby. Timestamp, March 2nd, 3:18 p.m. The silence stretched for a long time. Finally Mark spoke. His voice sounded smaller than usual. Emily. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the table. Emily, he repeated louder. What is this? She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered something barely audible. It's not what it looks like. I sniffed. That sentence has been used to describe almost every bad decision in human history. Mark looked up slowly. Then explain what it looks like. Emily shook her head. I was helping him with a project. Mark tapped the photograph. At a hotel? No answer. He flipped to the next page. Bank statements. Corporate investigation notes. Printouts Carla had prepared. One document showed a transfer request. $80,000. Pending investment agreement. Mark looked at me. His face had gone pale. Dad, what is this? I kept my voice calm. Your refinance money. He looked back at Emily. Is this real? She started crying. Not dramatic crying. Quiet crying. The kind people do when they realize the story is finished. Yes, she whispered. The word landed like a hammer. Mark leaned back in his chair. His eyes closed. For a moment he didn't move. Then he laughed once. A short, bitter sound. So let me get this straight. He pointed to the folder. You're sleeping with this guy. Emily shook her head quickly. It wasn't like. And convincing me to invest $80,000 into his fake real estate deal? She covered her face. I thought it was real. Mark stood up suddenly. His chair scraped loudly across the floor. You thought it was real? He looked at me. Dad, tell me this is wrong. I sniffed. I wish I could. What happened next wasn't loud. No shouting. No broken dishes. Just quiet decisions. Mark walked to the sink. Stood there for a moment. Then he turned back to Emily. You need to leave. She looked up slowly. Mark. Tonight. Her eyes widened. Please. Mark shook his head. No. He gestured toward the folder. You don't get to gamble our future and lie about it. Emily tried again. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Mark sighed. That's the problem. He paused. None of this was supposed to happen. Emily left the house at 7:42 p.m. She took one suitcase. And a purse. Nothing else. I watched through the kitchen window as her car pulled away. Mark stood beside me. Silent. After a while he said something quietly. How long did you know? Since Tuesday. Why didn't you tell me immediately? I sniffed. Because accusations without proof destroy families. He nodded slowly. And proof. I tapped the folder. Proof saves them. The next few weeks were complicated. Gregory Lawson's life collapsed faster than anyone expected. Lisa filed for divorce within 10 days. His company placed him on administrative leave. Then terminated him. Apparently the $96,000 misuse of company funds was easier to prove than he hoped. The internal investigation turned into something larger. Corporate fraud. Possible charges. The last thing I heard, Gregory had hired 2 lawyers and was trying to negotiate a settlement. Emily tried contacting Mark several times. Texts, emails, phone calls. He didn't respond. Eventually she sent one final message. I never meant for things to go this far. Mark showed it to me. I sniffed. That sentence, I said, usually appears right after someone drives off a cliff. The divorce process started 2 months later. Robert Keller handled everything. Efficiently, coldly. Emily didn't contest much. Mostly because the evidence was overwhelming. There were no children involved, which made things simpler. Financially, the damage was limited. The refinance never happened. The investment never happened. Mark kept the house. Emily left with a car and about $11,000 in savings. Compared to losing $80,000, that was a bargain. One evening about 6 months later, Mark and I were sitting on my porch, watching the sunset. Kansas sunsets can be beautiful when the sky is clear. Orange and purple spreading across the fields. Mark sipped a beer. You know something weird? He said. What? I'm not even angry anymore. I nodded. That's normal. What I feel is embarrassed. Also normal. He stared at the horizon. How did you stay so calm through all this? I sniffed once. Age. He laughed. No, seriously. I thought about it, then answered honestly. Because revenge doesn't work well when it's hot. He raised an eyebrow. Hot. Angry revenge, I explained. Usually hurts the wrong people. He nodded slowly. And cold revenge? I smiled. Cold revenge just lets the truth do the work. Life eventually becomes quiet again. Not the same quiet as before. A different kind. The kind that arrives after a storm has already taken what it wanted. About a year passed after the divorce. Seasons changed. Kansas winters came and went. The roof repair I originally went to discuss that Tuesday. I finally had it fixed. Cost me $9,200 in the end. Still cheaper than the first quote. Funny how the smallest problem in your life can turn into the biggest story. All because you went out for coffee. Mark adjusted faster than I expected. At first he was quiet. Worked long hours. Avoided conversations about relationships. That's normal after betrayal. But slowly things improved. He started running again. Started going fishing with friends. One evening he even laughed about something stupid on television. That was when I knew he was going to be all right. Pain fades. Humiliation fades. But self-respect, that one matters. And Mark kept his. As for Emily, I heard a few things through mutual acquaintances. Nothing dramatic. She moved to another city about 200 miles away. Found a job at a marketing company. Gregory Lawson never appeared in her life again. Not surprising. People like Gregory disappear quickly when the money dries up. Sometimes the ledger just takes longer to close. One afternoon about a year later, I went back to Riverside Grill. Same booth, same window, ordered the same black coffee. The waitress recognized me. "Back again?" she said. I smiled. "Just visiting an old memory." She refilled my cup. "Good one or bad one?" I sniffed. "Depends how you look at it." Because that place was where everything began. The lie, the discovery, the plan, and the quiet revenge. People sometimes imagine revenge as something explosive. But the older I get, the more I realize something simple. The best revenge is not destruction. It's protection. Protection of the people you love. Protection of your future. Protection of your dignity. If I had stood up that day in the restaurant, if I had shouted, if I had called Mark immediately and screamed about what I saw, none of this would have ended well. Emily would have denied everything. Gregory would have vanished. The investment might still have happened. And Mark might have lost $80,000 along with his marriage. Anger is fast, but strategy is precise. I finished my coffee and stood up. Outside, the parking lot looked exactly the same as it did that Tuesday. Same cracked pavement. Same maple trees. Same quiet street. But my life had changed in ways I never expected. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and before driving away, I thought about something my wife used to say. She was smarter than I ever gave her credit for. Whenever someone wronged her, she would shrug and say, "Eventually the truth shows up." Back then I thought that sounded naive. Now I know better. Truth does show up. Sometimes it just needs a little help finding the door. I sniffed once, put the truck in drive, and headed home,